Welcome on in to Art with Viv. Today I have got an adorable little Yorkie for you, and I'm painting it on a pink Pantone postcard with some gouache. You know, I love my gouache, and I've been working on learning how to use it for a year. I'm just taking those little eyes. I like to do the eyes first, and I'm just doing a base coat of sort of a dark brown, and then we're going to pop over to the nose. For the nose, I'm just mixing up some darker grays and blacks, which are really just brown and blue mixed. I rarely use black straight from the tube, so you know that if you've watched any of my videos. So we're going with sort of a bluish gray color, and we're just trying to get in some of those darker areas, and I'm going to let that dry. Coming over to a nice medium brown, we're going to just start layering in around the eyes how he has the brown fur around his eyes. Some tips about the fur is, of course, paint it in the direction that it's growing. I'm doing a little bit of an underpainting here. He's got white, gray, and black and brown in his fur. You know how cute Yorkies are. And so that's what we're going to work on. We're going to do those under layers first. I'm just trying to establish where the lighter blues and lavenders are underneath. And that is actually underneath some of the white fur and some of the black fur. And, you know, some of the brown fur. But I'm just getting those established, just so that I could sort of map out my lights and darks a little bit using that blue undertone with a little bit of lavender. And it'll look really pretty with the brown on top of that with a little bit of that peeking through. So that is where we are there. Now I'm coming in with a light kind of a yellow ochre, a little bit darker than a yellow ochre, maybe a little bit of burnt sienna mixed in with it. And I'm just doing her little mustache. Yes, she has a mustache, and that's okay. So we are going to do her sweet little mustache with this yellowy ochre mixed with a little bit of burnt sienna, and then we are taking some of the darker burnt sienna and putting in some of the shadows. Again, we are painting in the direction that the fur is growing so that it looks natural. We're going to come back over here to her little nose, and I'm adding some really pale gray that I've mixed with, mixed a lot of white into, and I'm getting that highlight in there, and then I'm coming back in with some little bit darker grays to get those not quite midtones, but not quite highlights either. We have a range of lights and darks that we can use, so I'm just getting in sort of the lighter midtones and some of the midtones, some of the darker midtones. Remember, we started off with our shadows that were really dark. We're going to probably have to come back in and get some really dark, just like we're doing now, and get those shadows reacquainted, put them back in, because I lost them with all of the smudging with the lighter gray. So I've got the darker shadows back in, and now I'm putting the highlights using that pale gray, and then an almost white, not quite white, but a really, really pale gray for the lightest of the highlights on the nose. And for her two little nostrils, I use the darkest blue and brown mixture that I have that I call black. I'm going to go ahead and put some really pale gray highlights in her eyes. Those highlights are not pure white. They are really, really pale gray. And then I put in a little bit of a darker gray underneath the lightest highlights, because those highlights are not pure white. They have a little bit of gray in them. So that's why I did that in the eyes. Now I'm painting her dark gray, which I've added some blue to. And that is where her little bow is, and it's pulling her hair up, her little bangs. She's pulling her little bangs up with her pink bow. So we're going to do that little puff of fur that's right between her eyes that we've gathered up with a bow, or whoever gathered it up. And so around that bow, I'm going to go a little darker with the gray, and where that fur, that silky, beautiful fur puffs out, we want that to look lighter so that it looks like it is convex. So it looks like it's poking out some. So we'll want to go lighter toward the middle where the highlight is and darker at each edge at the top at the bottom. Now she has some white fur, or it's really a pale gray, so I did that right above her nose. And now I'm adding some more of that pale gray around the top of her eyes, and now I'm just using a little bit of that brown and redefine those eyes. I lost a little bit of it during the painting, so I put some burnt sienna right around her little dark eyes. And now I'm taking some lighter grays and mid-tone grays and working out that area right above her nose. She also has some really dark fur there. So again, I've mixed my darkest blue with my darkest brown to get a really, really dark, not black, it almost looks charcoal, and I let it lean a little bit more to the blue side because I just think that looks a little softer and a little bit more realistic. So we're just getting in those darkest areas now, around the top of her nose, around the top of her eyes, and then she's got some little spushes of fur. I don't know what they're called, those spushes. She's got some spushes of fur on each side of her head that are really dark, almost black. So I just paint that in. It's not her ears. Her ears are poking up. She's got stand-up ears. She does not have floppy ears. But right now we're just using our dark blue and brown mixture to get in the darkest areas around her face. I love the way Yorkies have that silvery black fur. When the light hits it, it looks almost silver. And then they do have some silver fur too, or I call it silver. It looks silver to me. So I think that's really cool. I love those. And I'm just getting that in there, trying to pay attention to the lights and the darks. And of course, as always, I tell you, your shapes of your shadows and the shapes of your highlights and the shapes of your midtones. And right now I'm working on her eyebrows. They go all the way across and come down to her mustache. And I'm doing those in a really pale blue gray. And then I'm darkening up her mustache in some key areas there. That's all you got to do is just follow those, follow those shadow patterns. She is really starting to look like a puppy now. We are getting those lights and darks exactly where they need to be. Now I just mixed up a really light cream color, and I'm adding the highlights on top of that first layer that we did. And it's dry, so I'm actually using a layering technique. It's not glazing like watercolor because both layers are opaque. You can't see that darker brown layer through that light yellow layer because it's opaque. You just want to make sure you let some of that brown peek through. Now, if you are enjoying this, you might want to think about joining my Patreon for $3 a month. In the Peekers level, you get all kinds of goodies and extra bonus content related to my YouTube videos, so you might want to check that out. Now, once I get some of those highlights in there, again, remember to do strokes like fur and let some of that base color, which is a little bit darker, shine through, and that gives the illusion that you are painting fur. I'm just putting in some of those shadows. That is what makes it or breaks it, are the shadows, the highlights, and to make sure you get that value correct. Now, I like using two specific techniques for painting, especially fur or painting animals. And the first is the wet and wet, where you want that smooth transition between a darker color or a lighter color or two different colors. And then you just apply your gouache wet and then come back, and while it's still wet, come back with your other color and sort of blend those together. My other way is layering. What I'm doing here is where you let those first layers dry completely, and then you layer on top of those. You can do thin layers. You can glaze with gouache if you thin the paint enough, but that's not what I'm doing. I am just doing sort of a texture on top of texture to make it layered and to let some of that darker color, the medium color, and then the lightest color come through. And that way your eye visually blends it, but you still get that beautiful fur texture. So that's what I'm doing, is layering. Now I went ahead and got some of that black mixed again. Of course, it's not black. We've already went over that. We know that it is brown and blue mixed together. You can mix in varying amounts of white to get a lighter gray. You can mix in light blue to get a lighter gray. You can mix in dark blue to get a darker gray. You could even mix in a touch of red if you want a darker gray. Just experiment with that. And all I'm doing is just blocking in some of the darkest fur here on her little chest. And then we're going to jump over and do her back with some of that dark, deep dark mixture. And here I'm just kind of blending these two together. The black is still wet, and this lighter gray, I'm coming over top of it and letting those two blend together since they're wet. So it gives you some soft edges rather than when you're layering it, that layering gives you more crisp edges. But I wanted it to be a little bit softer in this area, so I'm doing wet and wet. That black fur is wet and my gray is wet at the same time. So that's giving you a softer blended edge. Now, if I wanted again, it would be crispier, a crispier looking edge, more detailed fur. What I would do is just let that dry and come back over with the really light gray in like brush strokes, and they would be nice and crisp because they would not blend. They would sit right on top of it. So that's just up to you, depending on the area you're working on, and if you want it to be soft and silky and sort of a smooth look, or a more blurred softened transition, or if you want that really defined texture of the fur. So it's up to you how you do that. Now I'm just adding in some more of that dark. Her little back is dark, so we're just going to paint that in. And I darkened up some of those other shadows on her little face while I was at it. And we're just going to get this all darkened in. She is starting to come alive. I just love this little Yorkie. She is as cute as she can be. She's a little fashion diva with her pink bow that she's going to have. She got her little pink bow, so she's a little diva with her little mustache. There was a woman I used to work for when I was a nurse, and she would come and she would like review our charts and stuff, and she had a mustache. And it was the most beautiful mustache I ever saw. She trimmed that thing. She had it looking nice and neat. And it was thick, but it wasn't like a man's mustache. But it was thicker than, the one or two hairs I get that I'm constantly having to pluck out. And I thought her mustache was the most beautiful mustache I had ever seen. And she had this long sort of brownish red hair that she kept in a long ponytail. And she just, I don't know, she rocked that mustache, and she was not the least bit worried about it. She trimmed it, make sure it was straight across her lips so it wouldn't be coming over and poking into her lips. She kept it tight. She was so pretty with her mustache. I was fascinated. I'm not gonna lie, I was fascinated with her mustache. I was like, dang, I wish I had a mustache. And then I was like, what am I saying? I got all these hairs that I'm constantly plucking out. I'll never be able to grow a mustache like hers, because hers was, filled in. It just wasn't thick and heavy like a man's. It was very feminine to be a mustache. Oh, and I'm not gonna lie, the men liked her. They was always hitting on her. I was kind of like, dang. And she loved her mustache. She wasn't fixing to shave it off, and I don't blame her. It was very striking. So back to our other little diva with her little mustache. Now we're going to work on her ears. She's got some brown in those ears. She's got some black in those ears, a little bit of silvery gray. And so that's what we are going to work on. And I'm darkening up some of the areas of her eyes. They are still a little light, so I just went lightly around those highlights that we did earlier with the darkest color, that darkest dark that we have. It's not black. I don't want to call it black because it's not really black, but it's taking the place of black. So now I'm just doing her little fluffy ears. She's got some cute little pointy ears. She is looking like a like a little diva, about ready to walk the runway. She's looking so cute. Again, I'm starting off with a layer of the brown, and this is sort of the mid-tone burnt sienna brown with just a little bit of yellow ochre mixed in with it, or maybe some, I don't know, I think it might have been Naples yellow that I mixed in with it. And, just getting in that area, that first layer. Once you get that layer, let it dry some, then you can come back with some highlights. And that's just that Naples yellow or a little bit of yellow. And I have just added some white to it to make it a lot lighter. And we're just going to come back in and start doing tiny brush strokes. Some of them are long because she does have some long hair. So we're just going to do the tiny strokes, darken in some of those shadow areas on this one ear. And just keep on doing that same thing we've been doing, looking for the highlights and the darkest shadows, and then getting the midtones in. I like to go from one to the other as I work. I don't do it like other people do it. I don't do the darkest tone first and then the mid-tone and then the lighter tone and then the highlight. I don't do it that way. I kind of do them back and forth, back and forth. I try to get my darks plotted in, mapped out, get my lights plotted in and mapped out. And then from there, I go either darker or lighter, depending on the area and if it has shadows or highlights. So now I'm going back over that with some darker brown, a little bit more burnt sienna with nothing mixed in with it, maybe a little bit of burnt umber in the darkest brown areas, and just paying attention to the shapes of those areas, the shapes of those colors and shadows, and just trying to get those as correct as possible. And that's really my secret. I'm just always paying attention to the shapes and the shadows. I'm not fixing to look at the whole dog and say I'm painting a dog. No, I am painting shapes and shadows and highlights and things like that. That's what I'm paying attention to. What shape they are, where they're at, how light or dark they are. And then trying to think about what colors do I need to mix to get those highlights? What colors do I need to mix to get those shadows? And then kind of blend those two colors together to get my midtones. I mix my darkers and my darkest shadow colors and my lighter colors, and that gives me my midtones. So that's how I work it. And it just makes it easier for the way that my brain works. I'm a little bit ADHD sometimes. My husband will tell you I get on his nerves because I can switch up in about 2 seconds and forget what I'm doing, and it just aggravates him. Now I just got a little bit of pink mixed up here, and it's a darker pink. I just used my cool red and put a little bit of white in it to mix up that bow color, and then I put a little more white in that same color so that I could get the highlights there to make it look like, a bow, like it's curved. And I also put a little bit of that highlight color right in the center of the bow, just so that you can see that it has a little gathering center there. Now, while that is drying, I just went back and got some of my darker color from the palette. I'm putting in some shadows, separating some of these highlights because they're a little too thick. They don't look realistic. They're just like bands of color. So I just went in there and broke some of those up. Now I'm going in with my almost full strength red with no white, going right around the edges of that bow, and then coming back with a really pale pink that I've added a lot of white to. So that was darker on each edge of each bow on the edge, and then I went with a pale color right next to that darker edge, and then I just used my brush to blend those two where they meet. And that makes it look like a shiny bow, a little bit more shinier. I'm just adding a little bit of that mid-tone in there, add a little bit of the lighter color where you need it, just darkening up some of those shadows in that bow. Now I'm coming back again with that darker tone. I'm just kind of cleaning things up, seeing where I can make it look better. Now I'm going with an almost pure white. It has just a tiny bit of red in it, but it's almost pure white, and just putting those lightest highlights on that bow so that it looks shiny. And now I'm just taking some more of the darker red, going back around those edges, and then right in the center, right around that little button, that little center of the bow. and just sort of blending it so it looks soft. And I think we're almost done with our cute girl. We're just going to add a little bit of shadows in her eyes, some of that really dark bluish black color around her nose. We're just going to add a few more of those darker shadows. I think she's doing pretty good. We're almost done getting the tips of those ears, and there she is. I think she is beautiful. I am just going to I just add a little bit more of the darker red in some of those areas just to darken up those bow shadows. I think she's beautiful. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for, supporting me, all my Patreons. And if you like this, don't forget to hit like, give me a comment, subscribe. I would love to have you as part of my family. So thanks for watching, and just remember, a masterpiece isn't going to get painted unless you actually start putting your brush to your paper.